Thank you very much. It's very exciting for me to be here today. I really like, can you still hear me? I like to talk about my adventure. It's something we do after our missions. We typically go out into the community and share our experience in space with the community, with people, with schools, with organizations, because it's a lot of fun and it's good to spread the word around the country of all the exciting things that are going on in NASA. And what we do after a mission to help with this conversation is we make a movie of what our mission was like. And that's what I brought here today. I'd like to start with that. It's an 18-minute video. It starts with the launch and landing that I participated in, and it shows what we did in space, what it's like to live in space, and fun things like that. And after that, I'd like to open up the floor immediately to questions and answers, because I'm sure that you have lots of questions, and it's a lot more fun to interact and talk a little bit more personally about things that happen in the space program. My mission was actually a little bit longer than the mission that I was involved in was a little bit longer than what the movie talks about. I flew with two other astronauts, a cosmonaut from Russia, Yuri Lonchikov, an American astronaut, Mike Fink, and they arrived at the space station a month before I did. They launched out of Russia, out of Baikonur, on a Russian Soyuz rocket, so they were waiting for me when I got there. They would replace the crew that was living there before them, and one guy was crossing over between the two crews, Greg Chanitoff. He was an American astronaut that went up on a shuttle earlier in the year, in the June time frame, and he was the one I was replacing on the space station in November. So when I arrived, Mike and Yuri and Greg were there, and then Greg and I were swapping out. Originally, I was supposed to come a little bit earlier and swap with someone, but in the end, Mike and Yuri and I ended up coming home within 2 weeks of each other. I, of course, returned on a shuttle in March, and Mike and Yuri returned 10 days later on a Soyuz and landed over in Kazakhstan. So the Expedition 18 that I was involved in was actually 6 months long. I was there for about 4.5 of it. And again, this movie just talks about the 4.5 months that I was there, even though what we accomplished during the mission was in that major time frame. So let me go ahead and start this. Of course, every mission has to have its patch. We were the 18th crew to live on the space station. We've been having crews on board since November of 2000, and it's usually been a mix of Russians and Americans until now, and I'll go into a little bit more detail about that. I launched on a shuttle out of Florida. This was my second launch. We go down to Florida about 3 or 4 days before the launch. The day of launch, we get up a little bit early. We get some help putting our orange suits on, our pressure suits. We go out to the launch pad, and there's some people at the launch pad that help us finish getting dressed and put us in the vehicle. We have to put our parachutes on, our harnesses, our helmets, our gloves. They strap us down really tight in the vehicle, and there you are laying on your back for a couple of hours as you wait for the engines to light and your journey to start. The shuttle that was taking us up was going to be a night launch, which was really exciting for my family because my first launch was a day launch. And so now they were going to see the difference between launching a shuttle in the day and launching a shuttle at night. It's pretty spectacular at night launch because the rockets, when they go off, light the whole area like daytime. So you're laying on your back, you're waiting for this launch. It seems like time is going very slowly. You're anxious to go. And the last 10 minutes, in contrast, seem to go very, very quickly. You shut your helmets, turn on your oxygen. At 6 seconds to launch time, the three main engines of the shuttle light. And we do this because if the shuttle engines are not operating appropriately, we can still shut them down and abort. You feel the whole stack sway when the shuttle engines light. If they're working appropriately, the countdown continues to 0. Then the solid rocket boosters light, those two skinny rockets that are attached to the shuttle. They provide 6 million of the over 7 million pounds of thrust that we use to get to orbit. When they light, you know you are going somewhere. You are it's pretty neat. You have a big kick in your seat. There's a lot of vibration. There's a lot of shaking. There's a lot of noise. It's very noisy. And it lasts like that for about 2 minutes. On my first mission, I sat in the flight deck and helped monitor the shuttle systems. This time I basically was cargo. I sat on the mid-deck and just sort of enjoyed the ride. It only takes 8.5 minutes to get to orbit. We spend the next couple of days slowly catching up to the space station, which is up around 200 or 250 miles above the planet. It starts off during the rendezvous phase as this teeny tiny bright star in the sky, and as we rendezvous, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and it's really quite fascinating to rendezvous with this laboratory, this house, this building that we've built in space. We dock, we open the hatches, and there's Mike and Yuri and Greg waiting for us. This is going to be a busy time frame. Not only was the shuttle responsible for picking me up and bringing Greg back, but we also brought a lot of cargo with us that Mike and I were to use during our mission. The shuttle guys reached into the shuttle payload bay with a robot arm, attached this cargo carrier to the bottom of the station, and started transferring a lot of this equipment. This is an example of a rack. It's a big large piece, a lot of equipment's contained in it. We brought 2 racks that contain the water recycling system. This is a system that Mike and I were going to install and get operational that allows you to take urine and condensate and turn it into potable water. This was very important in order to increase the crew size to 6, which was the main goal of our mission, was to install all of the equipment we needed to take the crew size from 3, which is where it had been since November of 2000, to 6, which is where it was going to be in May after we leave. So there were 2 racks of this water recycling equipment. There's a glimpse of the inside of the rack. We brought two crew quarters, or 2 new bedrooms, a second toilet, another piece of exercise equipment. In addition, tons of science experiments and logistics and spares and things like this. And so while Greg and I were handing over, he was teaching me everything I needed to know about living in space. The shuttle crew, along with Mike and Yuri, were transferring a lot of this equipment, and the shuttle crew, while they were there as well, did 3 spacewalks to go out and work on the external part of the station and do some repairs and maintenance that had to happen there. I was assisting, like on my first mission, I was the robotics officer and assisted flying the robot arm in support of the spacewalks. This was a very busy time frame. When the shuttles come, you're very pressed for time. There's a lot to do. You have a short period of time to do it while the shuttle's there. And so they were there for about 12 days or so. We said goodbye to them on Thanksgiving, and then it was time to relax for just a minute. It's like when you get company, you're really happy to see them, and then you're really happy for them to go away. So we had a lot of cleanup to do, because of course they transferred all of this equipment. We transferred all the spares, food, clothing, everything. It was time to get it all organized. It's like getting a moving van coming to your house. They just dump it, and now you've got to unpack and get it straight. And that's really the key to living on the space station, is understanding how to put things away and how to find them again. And we use these big white bags that you see on the video to help keep things organized. And that was one of the biggest challenges up there, was just finding things when you needed them. In between doing all of this, we started our science program. We have several different science facilities up there. This is an example of working in a glove box. We do lots of different kinds of experiments. Combustion experiments, the combustion processes are different in microgravity. I'm a human guinea pig. We learn a lot about how human beings change in space, and we're continuing to learn that. We have plant experiments, materials experiments, technology demonstration kinds of experiments, just a little bit of everything. So on any given day, I would be building the crew quarters or putting the water recycling system together. This is an example of the crew quarters. Organizing the equipment and putting things away or getting things out, and just doing general organizational types of tasks, or doing science experiments. So it was really quite nice to have such a variety of things to do. And again, the main goal of our mission was to install all this equipment, get it running, so that we could indeed go to a 6-person crew. There are 3 different laboratories up there, primarily. This is the Japanese laboratory, so we have a full-fledged laboratory from Japan. We have a laboratory from the European Space Agency as well. And this is a picture of the US laboratory. In addition, the Russians have laboratory space back in their module. So on any given day, I could be talking to scientists in Tokyo, in Germany, in Cologne, or Munich, where their control center was, in Huntsville, where a lot of our scientists work out of, in Houston, if there were systems problems, also the Moscow control center. And it was really kind of special to be able to talk to people all over the world and work together on this big monster laboratory that we've built in space. This is an example of another place where we do combustion processes in order to understand how flames and fire processes work. There's a lot of very interesting experiments going on, and of course we work together around the world to build a science program that complements each other, so we don't repeat types of experiments. And it's kind of interesting to live in space, because you have to keep track of all of your stuff. Imagine if everything on your table just started wanting to float away. So you have to really pay attention to your stuff, and it affects how you do your tasks. This is the galley area. This is where one of the areas where we used for eating and things like this. It was very comfortable to be on the ceiling and pull water out of the galley into the drink bags, for example. We were up there over the holidays, and I had planned ahead of time to do some cooking in space, because I like to cook. And we're on a 16-day rotating menu, so every 16 days you see the same food, which after 4.5 months is not so pleasant. So I found out that with duct tape and a Ziploc bag, you can really do some very inventive things in the kitchen. And Yuri and Mike ended up being my guinea pigs as I tried all of these different dishes, which don't look so appealing, but are actually turned out quite good. Eating in space is fun and challenging all at the same time. It's fun to have your food float, but it's also dangerous to have your food float, because then you just have a bigger mess to clean up. Washing my hair was another thing that was really difficult for me to learn how to do. It took about a month to figure out how to wash my hair, because I have to get the water in, and I can't just stand under a shower, of course. I had a drink bag and get the water on it, figure out the right amount of shampoo so that I have enough lather to clean, but not enough that I have a mess to clean up, because you can't just rinse it out anymore either. And it took about a month to get the right level and I put this in here because it's not something you think about. You know, it's not something to think about. So that was my big challenge. This is an example of our bedroom. I mentioned the 2 crew quarters that we brought up, and this is where we stayed. It was our own personal private spot. You had your sleeping bag on the wall. I actually bungeed myself into the sleeping bag to actually feel like you were in a bed. You have a computer in there. You can do email, watch movies, write, read books, have your family pictures, but it was your one personal private space, and that was very handy. You still have to do housework in space. You can't get away from it, so every weekend we would clean and vacuum the space station. If you've lost anything during the week, you could find it at the filters, because the fan flow blows the pens and the erasers and the paper clips and things to the filters, so that's where you found things. Exercise was very important. This was the exercise device that was up there when we got there, and this is the one that we built. And this is resistive exercise. You do an hour of this a day. It simulates weightlifting. It's loading your bones and your muscles, and if you do that and you take it seriously, you come back in pretty good shape. If you do not, then your muscles will atrophy and your bones will lose density, and that can be very bad when you return. So we did an hour of resistive exercise every day, and you also have a chance to do an hour of cardio. We have a treadmill, which you can see here. You put a harness on, and for those of you who have been backpackers, it's very important in the harness that you adjust the load between your shoulders and your hips. You bungee yourself to the treadmill and you run, and this is sort of a dynamic loading on your bones and muscles to make sure that they get a little bit of use, otherwise they're not being used at all. And for people who didn't like to run, there was an exercise bicycle you could strap yourself down to and work on as well. I found that you get different things out of different pieces of exercise equipment, and I used all 3 of them. Of course, resistive every day, and I would alternate the treadmill and the bicycle. We did a lot of public outreach, talked to students all over the world on the ham radio. And we had time to do what I call stupid astronaut tricks, where you just enjoy the moment. This was the one time I really got myself dizzy, as I did a lot of somersaults in a row. I was like, okay, slow down, that's not good. Any kind of superhero dreams? You can do that. So people ask us if we get bored in space, and you can't, because you can do things like this. This is an example of why we do research in space. This is water. The behavior of water changes drastically in space. You know, gravity drives a lot of the processes that we see on the ground. For example, the iced tea and the water in your glasses are staying in your glasses because gravity is holding them there. And it drives the shape of water and how it behaves. In space, something called surface tension takes over the behavior of a lot of the fluids. And you can do things like this. You can make this glove of water, for example. And it's really very interesting. And so we're learning about these things, and there's a lot of experiments that people do with putting different kind of particles in liquid systems and trying to see if you can drive the behavior in certain directions and make new systems out of it. And these are the kinds of things that, as we do more in microgravity, we learn things that we don't even know that we don't know yet. And that's what's very good about having such a laboratory. Of course, another thing that you can do on orbit that keeps you from getting bored is look out the window. And this is one of the things that you never, ever get tired of doing. It only takes 90 minutes for us to orbit around the Earth. We're going 17,500 miles per hour. And so at any given moment, every 45 minutes, you'd have a sunset or a sunrise, and you could look out the window and watch the Earth go by. And we have such an incredibly beautiful planet that no matter where we were flying over, you could look out and find something interesting. This was one of my favorite places. This is some high-definition video of the Caribbean. And the Caribbean is absolutely gorgeous, and those of you who have flown over it in airplanes know that when you look out the window, you see all these magnificent colors of blues. Well, from 250 miles up, it's even more dramatic. You can clearly see where the deep ocean is and the coral reefs start, and where the ocean floor starts to rise, and you've got underwater hills and valleys and channels, because the colors change from the midnight blue of the deep ocean to a royal blue, to a sky blue, to a teal, to a blue-green, to a green-blue that you can see here. And the textures are very interesting as well. It's hard to see in the video, but up here where the circle, the tongue of the ocean comes in, there's a lot of little channels. And each one of those channels has several different colors of blue as the depth changes through those channels. And you could take a picture of this with an 800-millimeter lens and get a very good close-up. And you wouldn't be able to tell a difference between that and some of the very nice modern art pictures you can find in museums around the Earth. So I used to call it Mother Nature's modern art, because you could see these kinds of structures and colors all over the planet. Another area that I really like to look at was the Sahara Desert. And people are surprised by that, because you think of the desert as a very desolate place, it's not such an interesting place to look at, but there are these lines of sand dunes that have been formed in the Sahara Desert, and I'm assuming it's from wind patterns. I don't know anything about geography, which I wish I did, or geology. That was one thing I wish I knew more about as I was looking out the windows. But they're very symmetric, and they just span hundreds of miles in the Sahara Desert. You can see them clearly. You can see where meteorites have hit, craters and things like this. You can see dry lake beds and dry river beds, and the colors are, beiges and browns and rusts and purple blacks and midnights, and it's just absolutely gorgeous. You can see along the Nile clearly where the irrigation is taking place. There's a green ribbon right along the Nile. It's all very clear to see. You can see all kinds of interesting things. At night, when you go to the night side of the planet, and the areas of the world where there's a lot of population, on the east coast of the United States and in Europe, this is Europe, you can see the cities. You see the structures of the cities, the light patterns, the road patterns, and all these interesting things, and it's just fascinating. I was originally supposed to be on orbit till mid-February, and sometime in late January timeframe, Houston called up and said, well, the shuttle's going to be a week late. Okay, fine. No, be here another week. Next week they called up, well, the shuttle's going to be a week late. And they did that for a month. It's like, okay, you guys, just tell me when it's coming. We had pretty much finished most of the things that we were supposed to get done. So by the time the shuttle finally launched, I was really excited because I was ready to come home. I had a great time, but we finished everything we set out to do. They were bringing my replacement, Koichi Wakata, who's to be the first Japanese long-duration astronaut. They were also bringing the last solar array. Just as Mike and I had outfitted the inside of the station to be ready for a 6-person crew, we needed the last solar array attached to the station to provide the last amount of power that we needed to support the increasing experiments and things like this we're going to be doing with 6 people available to operate. So when they docked, Koichi and I immediately started handing over, and I taught him everything that Greg had taught me. Meanwhile, the shuttle crew reached into the payload bay with the station robot arm, picked up the solar array, swung it around, attached it to the space station, and did 3 spacewalks to hook up all the power and data and thermal. So these guys were only there for a short period of time, about 10 days. It was time to leave. I packed up my own little white bag of stuff and went across the hatch and said goodbye to Koichi and wished him luck, and it was time for me to come home. And while I was excited to come home, I was ready. We had finished everything that we wanted to do. I was also a little bit sad because I wasn't sure, if or when I was ever going to get there again. And living there for 4.5 months was quite a unique experience, and it had been my home. And so I was both happy and sad to leave. But what was really special is when we undock in the space station, we don't immediately leave fly with the space shuttle away. We do a loop. We fly a loop around the space station so we can take pictures of it for the ground. And just to give you a feel for how big the station is, from this end to this end, across the truss where the solar arrays are, it's about the size of a football field. And as you see, these are the European laboratory, the Japanese laboratory. The shuttle usually docks here. And as you go down the axis of the station, all these modules that we live in all the way to the back, that is also about the length of a football field. So it's really a very large space station. It's something we've been constructing since 1998 when the first piece launched out of Russia and then the piece from the US launched. And there's 16 countries involved. We've been working together for over a decade now to build this. Really, it's a building. It's a monster building in space that we've built. And it's really quite an accomplishment when you consider all the cultures and the languages and the agencies and the people involved that we've been able to do this. The shuttle then, after separating from the space station, is on orbit for another couple days. And then it's time to come home. We put our orange suits on, strap ourselves in our seats, and we fly. Well, we don't actually fly. It's a controlled fall as the shuttle comes back into Earth's gravity. We don't use engines when we return. It's a big glider. So it's basically deorbit, and it's a controlled fall all the way to the runway, and that's a lot of practicing that the pilot and the commander do, and a lot of smart people in mission control build our trajectories to have us deorbit halfway around the planet and end up, no kidding, on a runway, whether it's in Florida or in California. So I wasn't really worried about coming home on the shuttle. I knew they'd practiced a lot, and we do that very well. I was concerned about coming back into gravity after being gone for 4.5 months. I wasn't sure. I exercised like a mad woman when I was up there so to make sure I was strong enough, but what was it going to be like after floating for 4.5 months to come back? Was I going to be able to stand up? Was I going to be able to breathe? What was this going to be like? And so we started coming into the atmosphere, and I started feeling the pull of gravity on me. I started moving my hands and my legs and feet and my neck a little bit just to get a feel for it. And just as with my first mission, it struck me anew, and probably even more so after being gone for 4.5 months, what an incredible force gravity is. And for those of us who haven't been able to be on the space station or be off the planet, you don't really realize how hard this is. Just holding your hand in the air is incredibly energy consuming. And as I was coming in, it's so interesting. I think it's one of the more interesting things about flying in space is coming back and feeling gravity as an external force, feeling it act on you, feeling it pull you to the planet. And it's really hard to describe it. You don't understand. You are working hard every day. You don't know. You really are. And having that external perception, I think, is one of the unique things about flying in space. And it took me 2 weeks to reset to the energy level that you need just to function. So, for example, every day for 2 weeks, about 5 or 6 o'clock, I was so tired and so fatigued, and I just wanted to lay down. The lowest energy state I could get to required, nothing else, just to lay there, because gravity just felt it pulling me down. And after 2 weeks, my body reset and I was back to a normal energy level. But it was a very interesting observation. My balance was off for about a week or so. If you wanted me to look over in this direction, I would not be turning my head like this, my whole upper body. And slowly over the course of the week, I was able to separate upper body turning from head turning, from eye turning and nodding and all these kinds of things. So in my head, you have a fluid in our inner ear that helps us with our balance, and so that keys off of gravity. And so for 4.5 months, that fluid was just in there kind of ricocheting around doing nothing. And I did feel like I had this standing wave in my head. I was very woozy. Luckily, I'm not the kind of person who gets nauseous, because some people do get nauseous because you're trying to take in all these sensations. And so over the course of the week, that pretty much settled down. We have a 6-week rehab program, so after 6 weeks, working 2 or 3 hours with physical trainers, I laughed at him and said, "You could turn me into the bounding woman. I'm better, stronger, faster than I was when I left." So we have a really good rehab program. And then I just sort of eased back into normal life. But that kind of gives you a nice overview of not only what it was like to live in space, the kinds of things we're doing, just where we are right now in the space program. The space station is about 90% complete. There's a few more modules and things that need to be added. We did go to a 6-person crew in May. As a matter of fact, this summer we had a Japanese, a Belgian, a Canadian, 2 Russians, and an American living there. And you will see these kinds of crews from now on out. You will see people from all the different partner agencies sending astronauts up, and everyone will be living on there for about 6 months at a time. And you'll see these rotations continue. We're on Expedition 20 right now, and you'll see this continue to move along. So there's a lot happening, and it's sort of happening quietly in the background. So what I'd like to do is stop now.